Good evening and welcome to tonight's Zoom room presentation with the Honourable Mr Malcom Turnbull as our guest. It's fantastic to see so many squadron members attending tonight. There will be a chance for you to ask questions following the main discussion this evening, so please send these through to us via the Q&A function on your Zoom toolbar. I will now hand the proceedings over to our MC and squadron member, Mr Phil Frost, who will introduce Mr Turnbull and facilitate our virtual fireside chat. Welcome, Phil.
Thanks, Alison. And our guest this evening, as we all know, is Malcom Turnbull, former Prime Minister and a man of many parts and many achievements. He's an old Sydneyan, a journalist, a Rhodes Scholar, lawyer, scourge of the British intelligence establishment, player in all levels of Australian media, investment banker, investor, member of parliament, opposition leader, deposed opposition leader, prime minister, deposed prime minister, but most importantly, through it all, the loving husband of Lucy, father of Alex and Daisy, and to his grandchildren. Welcome, Malcom, and thank you for joining us at the Squadron.
Thanks, Phil. Great to be with you.
You know, we meet in interesting times. I mean, the fact that we're doing this by way of Zoom as a result of COVID is a big change, and it's one of those things where technology has sort of challenged many things, but it's actually shown a lot of different capacities that we have, and I suspect when all this is over, the workplace won't be the same. How have you found the COVID experience, and how has it affected you?
Well, look, we've weathered it much more easily than most people, I think. You know, having a comfortable house in a beautiful city like Sydney, in a beautiful part of Sydney, that is, and also, you know, not being responsible for a big business with thousands of people and everything, as you know, many others are. It's probably, I think we've done well in the sense that we've been less discomforted than many others and most others. But I have to say, I think the impact of this pandemic is very unequal, as all big economic recessions are. You know, even things like the work from home phenomenon. You know, if you think about, I'm sure many of your members work for professional services firms and companies, law firms and so forth. You know, the older people that have got homes and studies and spare rooms to work from are can handle the work from home stuff pretty well. If you're a young couple with lots of little kids running around, it's pretty challenging. And then again, if you're even younger and you're sharing a house with three friends, there's not a lot of privacy, although there have been some rather amusing interruptions into Zoom calls when the flatmate, wanders off to the bathroom, picking up clothes on the way or dropping clothes on the way. It's
wanders back and forgets the towel.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. Exactly right. That's right. The wise Zoomers, I think, have worked out in shared accommodation to have them sit as close as they can to the background so no one can get behind them.
Yes, I mean, COVID's one of these black swan events that I think nobody except Bill Gates could predict. I mean, his prediction a few years ago was really quite on the money.
Can I just dissent from that, Phil? I mean, we've planned for pandemics for years. I mean, there's been a lot of, and this is why, the lack of preparedness in some countries is so scandalous. I mean, there have been plenty of pandemics before. This is the first sort of really big, damaging global one since for 100 years. Mm. But, with SARS and, bird flu and Ebola and all of these things that have either become pandemics or got close to it, there's been a lot of planning work done. So, I think I think there's a lot of really dumb mistakes were made early in the piece, just unforgivably stupid.
And we're getting there slowly, I think.
Yeah.
But look, this being a yacht club, let's first talk about boats, and in particular sailing boats. And as we were talking about a little earlier, you're a sailor. I mean, how did you start your interest in the water and sailing? Where did that come from?
Well, I always lived, around the eastern suburbs. So I used to go to Bondi Beach with my dad, and I used to go swimming down at Camp Cove. My mother had a girlfriend who, Rhonda Burnham, Rhonda Williams is a married name, who is an anaesthetist, and she and Mum were about the same age, and they were good friends. And they each gave birth to little boys within a week or so of each other. So naturally they hung out a fair bit together, and I spent a lot of time playing down at Camp Cove. And I do remember. I mean, we used to make canoes and rafts out of driftwood and all that sort of stuff. And that caused my mother to buy me a canoe. And when I started making sails to go in the canoe so we could get further afield, she suggested that my father might get me some sailing lessons, and I ended up first with a Sabo, and then with a Manly Junior, and then with a Moth at Wallara Sailing Club. But which were, of course, as the older viewers remember, the Moths of 50 odd years ago were very
Mark
different
II.
to the flying machines you see today.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
They were heavy old things with sometimes like the old BJs with canvas cockpits.
Yeah, they were. They were basically a mono sailed VJ, really. I mean, but with a sort of a groovier kind of hull shape, as I recall.
I think the squadron used them as youth sailing boats in the early days. So there's a lot of old squadron members who'd remember the Moths. Look, moving on to your book, I mean, Churchill is often quoted as saying that history will be kind to me, for I intend to write it. Well, in reality, you didn't say that at all. But for my part, I consider that it will be found much better by all parties to leave the past to history, especially as I propose to write history. Yeah. So is this the history according to Malcolm?
I guess
you
it
must write a book like this.
No, it must be. I mean, I've written a few books about interesting events in my life, and this is the fourth. This is the biggest one and the most comprehensive. But I did take great care to make sure it was accurate. I mean, I didn't. If you read it, you'll see that there are a lot of footnotes in it. I took great. I wouldn't say I'm fastidious, but I aim to be fastidious about facts and dates and things like that.
And one doesn't put together a list of achievements such as you have just by good luck. There's a lot of drive in this, and it seems to have been something that's driven you from an early age. It reflects a significant amount of self-confidence. How does one buy that? Where does that come from?
Self-confidence? Oh, well, I don't know.
Well, drive and self-confidence, I think.
I don't know. I've always been hardworking. I'm not bad at relaxing, but I've never been a sort of idle person. I don't prevaricate very much. I think that's prevarication and hesitation wastes a lot of time. And when I've got a task at hand, I put a huge effort into getting it done. So I can be very, very focused, which is I think important. And I've always been like that.
Well, as a young man, I think university, perhaps, when you were, I think, studying history according to your book, and instead of just reading up to see what Jack Lang said, you went and visited him.
Yeah, well, that was amazing, because as I describe in the book, so we're talking about 1974, and I'm doing an arts law degree and working as a journalist at the same time, and I was doing writing some papers about the political history in New South Wales in the 20s and 30s, which was a very interesting time, with the Great Depression and, the New Guard and Jack Lang. It was very, very colourful. As it happened, Jack Lang was still alive, although a very old man. He died in 75 at 99. And Bill McKell, a little bit younger than him, but still a very old man, who succeeded him as Labor leader, was also alive. And of course, they loathed each other. And so I used to shuttle from chatting to Jack Lang and seeing Bill McKell and back again. And I mean, they were the only, I mean, I don't think there was any other politician of that era that was still alive. It was just fascinating that these two guys who had been absolutely, you know, leading figures at the time had outlived everyone else.
Nevertheless, as somebody who, and you're similar age to me at 21, is meeting and interviewing and mixing with no fear with people of that ilk and that history. Not too many 21-year-olds would go around and do that. And I think that's the sort of thing. And if we go through the book, there's the names just roll off. I mean, Quentin Hogg, Lord Hailsham, very great man and a great man of law. Harold Evans from the Sunday Times. Later on, Goldsmith, not Jimmy Blacksmith, Sir James Goldsmith.
Yeah.
All of these people, huge people in their sphere, and some people that you've obviously met, become not necessarily close to all of them, but not intimidated by the positions that they held or the reputations that they held. And I think that's, if we follow through, has anybody ever intimidated you?
I don't think so. I mean, I don't back down easily, and I don't, I learned over the years that giving in to bullies is a huge mistake. I mean, that is, you know, one of the things, if you work that out at a young age, it's a good thing to work out, because this is not to say you don't want to go around picking fights with everyone, but the problem with bullies is that if you give in to them once, then all they do is want more. So it is a, and you know, and I mean, I use the term bully. I mean, that's the right word, but I'm not necessarily using it pejoratively. I mean, for some people, that is their MO.
Yeah.
You know, they're standover men and against, or women, if you like, but you know, because women, you know, women, strong personalities can do exactly the same thing. It's a technique. I mean, Trump, obviously, you know, he's an exact, you know, locus classicus of that. But you give it, you invariably. I'll give you a good description of it from Sam Chisholm, who some of you may remember, great old mate of mine, is no longer with us, who ran Channel 9. And for many years, and B-Sky B, he was one of the great titans of the television industry, although he was not of particularly titanic stature. And Sam was a bully, and Sam actually said once, he said, Malcolm, I am a bully, and I bully and intimidate everybody I possibly can. But on the occasions I meet someone who I cannot bully, such as you, because we just had a row and I told him, giving him a free character analysis. He said, such as you, then I treat them as equals, and at which point he offered me a glass of champagne. So now that's a completely open, upfront description of how a lot of people operate. So they bully those that they can, they get on top of them, and then if that doesn't work, well, then they say, okay, we're just going to have to, you know, have a more equal mode of dealing with each other.
Moved to charm.
Yeah, exactly. And in fact, that is a type.
Absolutely.
There is a type of bully, and there's plenty of examples of that, who can literally switch from the towering, incandescent, threatening bully. When they realise that doesn't work, suddenly there's a switch, and they're as charming as anything. And that is, again, that's another That's another thing. I mean, Kerry Packer was a lot, you know, could be like that. Kerry could be the most awful, bullying, you know, unpleasant personality, but on the other hand, he could also be charming, droll, all of those things.
So to move forward, I suppose one of the early notable successes was Spycatcher.
Mm.
And you talk about bullies. That was a classic case, I suppose, of a government seeking to bully all those to get their way.
Yeah.
Perhaps, I guess one way that I've reflected on it is that that bullying led to perhaps some mistakes or failures, complacency in the way they dealt with things, which gave you the opening to be successful in that. Would you like to talk about Spycatcher and what that meant? I mean, it was a titanic struggle in many ways.
Well, it was, but look, it was really odd in this sense that I was asked if I'd be interested in doing the case by the British lawyer, a guy called David Hooper for Wright's publisher, after they had been injuncted by the British government in Australia, and 2 or 3 big law firms and 4 top silks had told them in writing they couldn't win. And I had in fact, I still have all the advice. So they, you know, literally, they were basically told they didn't have a chance. And this guy had been talking to Geoffrey Robertson, and Geoffrey had said to him, "Oh, why don't you give Malcolm a call, you know, brackets, he'll have a go at anything," obviously was the implicit suggestion. And I'd just set up with Bruce McWilliam, a law firm. And so I agreed. The only reason we got to do the case was we agreed to do it, or Bruce was thankfully doing some more profitable work for the firm, but I agreed to do the case for $20,000. It was pretty much a year's work, and with a few $1,000s more if the case went for more than the trial went for more than 4 weeks. I mean, it was literally it was just ridiculous. I basically agreed to do it for nothing, and on that basis they hired me. And you know, we were always confident we'd win, and we just went about it in a very methodical way. And it's actually the case, the way it was Lucy and I managed to handle the case, and Lucy had a very big part in it. But the thing we did most effectively was just all of the interlocutory procedures, you know, interrogatories, discovery, whenever they arced up, you know, took them back to court. Then they'd go to the Court of Appeal. They generally lost, you know, and it was a good example of how you can, if you're prepared to do all of that pre-trial procedural stuff thoroughly, you can actually lay the groundwork where what appears to be a hopeless case suddenly starts to look as though you've got a real chance.
And if you have some people on the inside in the British Parliament being able to ask the right questions, obviously quite helps.
Oh yeah, well I arranged that. Yeah, that's right. Well, that was very funny.
Was the best thing about Spycatcher that you could hold your head high at family dinners in front of Tom Hughes?
Yeah, well, I think, you know, I think yes, it was certainly. I'd certainly earned my spurs as an advocate from that case.
Mm. It occurs to me that was a case of, it was sort of like the young boy going into bat for the first time for the Australian cricket team, scoring a century, hitting the ball out of the SCG, and then taking 5 wickets.
Yeah,
I think it's time to quit while you're ahead, and you moved on to investment banking soon.
Yeah, well, I did, and listen, it was a bit like that. There was a general, there was a sort of shock and horror at the bar that someone who was A, as young as me, and B, wasn't even a barrister, although I had been a barrister, but I was appearing unrobed as a solicitor, and it was the biggest most sensational case that had been heard for many years, and certainly the only Australian case, probably apart from Lindy Chamberlain, that got a lot of international coverage. And and it wasn't a member of the club, so it was terrible. They were pretty worried about it.
So we're in around 1987 at this stage, and I recall October 87 as being a momentous time. There was a number of things that took place, and as my mother used to say, it's an ill wind that blows no good. But let's see, there was the great stock market crash, and the Seven Oaks were destroyed that weekend. So what opportunities did that crash bring to you in your first bout into investment banking? Because there was a lot of the media that was changing at that time.
Yeah, the media, I mean, there were two obvious things that happened. I'd set up with Nick Whitlam and Neville Wran, and with investments from Packer and Adler, an investment banking business, And after the crash, Adler in particular, and wanted to get his money out, and we had not invested any of the capital in any material way, so we weren't affected by the crash. So that was fantastic. So we gave our investors our money back. We concluded that their involvement was actually creating more, negatives than positives anyway. And basically got involved in just one big media deal after another, because the media sector fell over. Obviously, the immediate consequence of the crash was young Warwick's crazy effort to take over the family company, Fairfax.
I remember it well.
Yeah, collapsed. I mean, that was just, I see Will Bailey died the other day, the former CEO of ANZ. Will was the guy that lent $2 billion to a 23-year-old kid he'd never
Virtually
met.
no security.
Yeah. Well, that's right. There was no security. You're absolutely right. And that's how Whitlam Turnbull got the gig to do all the asset sales and reconstruction, because they had Fairfax, the public company, had $500 million of debt in it, all from, as was the fashion in those days, all from a whole series of different, lines and, money market lines and, finance companies. I don't know why people complexified their borrowing that way, but they did. Anyway, and then there was all of this acquisition debt in the takeover vehicle. And they had to somehow or other get that, secured against the assets of the company. But they obviously couldn't do that without the consent of the lenders.
The cash upstream.
Yeah, and one of them, I think it was a subsidiary of the NAB, just demanded their money back. And they couldn't, and I was literally sitting outside, and I think it was Ron Cotton called out. He said, "Where are we going to find," I've got a feeling it was $13 million. It might have been more. And I just said, I can handle that. Literally.
Johnny on the spot.
Yeah, got Witto on the phone, and we said, right. And we had a bank check round for $13 million, and then we were in the door. So it just goes, so that was just literally sitting in the corridor.
So here you are, you're dealing with print media. You've had a long-term relationship with Packer by that stage. You've been a journalist. Television starts to come into the game.
Yeah.
On the Channel 10.
Well, we'd had
around that occurred at that stage after Loewy's.
I hadn't sort of originated the deal, but I negotiated the sale of, Bruce McWilliam and I negotiated the sale of the 9 Network 2 bond in 87. And we then we bought it back 3 years later. That was a rather unusual, very complicated transaction. We basically got it back for a third of the price. So it was a hell of a deal. Anyway, and then when 10 went broke in about 92, we got hired to by Westpac essentially to sort it out, which we did, and we restructured the 10 network and turned it into got the right management in there to turn it into a low-cost operator. And you know, the proposition was we may be number 3 in the ratings, but we're going to be profitable number 3, you know. And that formula worked for a long time. The bank sold it to Izzy Asper, the Canadian television mogul, you know, as long as they stuck to that low cost strategy, they did very well. And then of course they decided the answer was to be found by spending money, which is very dangerous in television.
So we're in a situation here where you've met all the players in the media in Australia at this stage. You've dealt with them as a financier or as an investment banker. You've also worked with Packer as a journalist. Indeed, I think in the book you talk about I don't know whether it was your first meeting with Murdoch in New York when he was taking over the New York Post. And
yep.
You've developed, probably nobody has as much understanding and depth of knowledge of media at that stage. Very strong personalities. I mean, what have you learned about the men and women who run the media and the modus operandi, I suppose, of media? Because all of this, of course, is a very, very useful skill for somebody who's wishing to move into politics.
Yeah, well, I got to know a lot of people in the media from a very young age, and I'd worked as a journalist. I'd had most roles in the media as a business, other than actually editing something. But yeah, and I was very. It was in some respects very heady. I mean, look. On the other hand, I was very, very confident about my abilities, and I mean, I'm sure that everyone thought I was very arrogant too, but I don't think I was arrogant. But anyway, let's assume I was. The bottom line was I was very confident, and when I look back on it, the proposition that Packer would ask me at the age of 28 to do all of his legal work. I mean, he basically. I'd been at the bar for 2 years, and Kerry persuaded me to come back to Consolidated Press as the general counsel and do all his legal work. And I hired Bruce, and we had another couple, you know, ended up having a couple of other people there, but Alan's basically stopped getting work from Conspress. You know, I mean, Kerry saved millions, by the way. I mean, listen, it was look, with the benefit of hindsight, particularly given the job we did for him on the Costigan and Commission and various other things, it was a very smart call. But you think about it, if you had one of the largest media groups in the world, in Australia, and would you hire a 28-year-old lawyer to look after all your affairs?
Perhaps if his name was Malcom Turnbull.
Well, clearly that's right. But what I mean, it just, it never occurred to me that this was a rather rash decision on his part. But he was, I mean, the Costigan, I'm sure other people could have done the commercial deals as well. But the approach I took to the defending Kerry and the Costigan Royal Commission was so eccentric and unlike what any other lawyers that we were dealing with were recommending. In fact, basically the legal profession generally were appalled by the approach I took. But had I not done that, he would have been out of business. You know, he was in diabolical trouble because his banks were calling up, you see, you know, and he had his main assets were television licenses, which a condition of which was that the licensee was a fit and proper person. And so we were handling a Royal Commission going after him and using the media to do so, then the National Crime Authority, Taxation Office, and the Broadcasting Tribunal, all pursuing the same stuff. And the you know, so we had to basically win the case in the court of public opinion. We couldn't, you know, if we'd allowed the just legal process to take its course, he wouldn't have lasted, because he would have been forced to sell, I think.
So that was a very powerful relationship that was established there. How close was that relationship? Clearly, he regarded you very highly.
Yeah, well, I think.
But he had also, you know, being Kerry, was one to want a nickel and dime when he could, and let you know who was boss.
Yeah. He did. He was capricious, right? I mean, a lot of powerful people demonstrate their power by caprice. But look, I think the best summary, I mean, okay, just to give a bit of background, the Costigan, you know, inquiries began around some deals and tax-related deals that Kerry had done with a guy called Brian Ray, who was a property developer on the Gold Coast, a really lovely man, very good friend of mine and of Kerry's. And sadly, he and his wife Kathy some years ago were killed in a light plane crash. Anyway, their children Tom and Savannah are doing very well. Singleton, John Singleton, after the you know, we'd absolutely won, and you know, the Attorney General had given Kerry an apology for the allegations that had been made, and you know, they'd concluded there was no case to prosecute. I mean, he basically had to prove his innocence. Like, it was pretty, you know, you'd only want to be forced to do that if you had the resources of a packer, I can tell you. Anyway, so Singleton told me once that he was with Kerry, and he said to Kerry, "Well, Kerry, you know, just remember, if it hadn't been for me, you never would have met Malcom Turnbull." And Kerry thought for a minute, and he said, "Yeah, that's right, John, but if you hadn't introduced me to Brian Ray, I never would have needed to meet Malcom Turnbull."
Yes, interesting. Times move on. You'd had one attempt early on at running for Wentworth. Almost got there, but a Prime Minister's call had stymied your position.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing personal there, by the way. I mean,
no.
I mean, I literally I was back from Oxford, had been married, you know, married for about a year. I'd gone to the bar. I was, you know, rejoined the Liberal Party in Wentworth when I came back, and there was a pre-selection on, and I said to Luce, "Well, look, I may as well throw my hat in the ring. I won't get anywhere, but there might be some solicitors on the pre-selection panel, and if I impress them, they might send me some work." I mean, this is how I'm sure there are some barristers on this call. This is how barristers think. Every barrister, no matter how eminent or successful, thinks that the brief they got yesterday is the last one they'll ever get, and they're about to be broke. So
good as the last deal.
That's right. So anyway, as it happened, I nearly won, which was very disconcerting, especially for Mrs. Turnbull.
So you go through all of the business side of things. You're a key player in the sides of media. And then you decide eventually to run again for Wentworth, and you decide to take on Parliament. And I think, you know, you've spoken about politics as being often irrational, emotional, tribal, versus business, where things are rational, everything is measured by the one currency. And you can understand where people are coming from, and then you dive into a totally different pool. What's the motivation to do that? There's got to be
public service only. I mean, you can't answer that question other than by sounding corny, but it's, you know, it's public service, patriotism, the desire to, you know, do your bit in making sure Australia's you know, an even better place to grow up in for your children and grandchildren than it was for you. You know, I mean, I do take public service seriously. I think, it makes a real difference. The quality of the people in politics makes a huge difference, believe me. I mean, and that's, you think about it, politics is so relatable if you think about it, because it's just people, and we are people and we work with people. A well-run business versus a badly run business, a well-run government versus a badly run government, a political leader that is capable, has got convictions, vision, can follow through, someone who's only interested in staying in office. These make huge differences. So, the idea that you can have this sort of cynical idea, it doesn't matter who we elect, they're all as bad as each other. Regrettably, that's not the case. Some of them are really, really bad and hopeless, and some of them are, a bit better. And so it's not, and that cuts across parties. So, I do think it's harder and harder to get good people into Parliament. I always think it has always been, because it's such an arduous business. But, in Australia, say, versus the UK, because we're such a big country, if you're a member of Parliament, federal Parliament, unless you live in unless you're from Canberra, you will be spending, between at least a third, probably more like half the year away from home. And if you're a minister, you might be spending 2 nights out of 3 away from home. So that's very, very tough on families. It's very hard, and of course look, politicians are not paid badly, but the very generous, pension schemes that they used to have were all abolished by Howard in 2004. So they basically got public service type super, which is, again, is not ungenerous. But if someone, there's a lot of people, if you are not financially independent at the time you go in, you are certainly not going to become financially independent while you're in Parliament. And when you get out, you're not going to have a sort of like a pension for life, like a High Court judge, or like, the politicians who abolished the pensions have, because when they abolished it in 2004, they abolished it for everyone who was elected from 2004 on. So
Always back self-interest, because
that's right.
I mean, you touch on a point there, looking back in the bad old days, or the good old days, however you like, that governments were better. They were perhaps better governed. We didn't have the same degree of fractiousness that we're seeing today. I personally think that that's probably not, there's no truth in that whatsoever. I think people have been the same ever since the Greeks or before. And their relationships with one another, and their fights and their enmities and things like that. But I think perhaps what we're seeing now is that the ability, because of the, if you like, the democratization of social media and the media in general, means that anybody can get a message out. And there's not that filter that's controlled. So the message is not being controlled anymore. Anybody has a say, everybody can hear it. And under this, in this sort of environment, how difficult is it as a Prime Minister, for example, to actually manage a fractious backbench, to manage your agenda, and to be able to deliver on the vision and the reason that you went in there in the first place?
Well, it's hard, and it's hard, and it's got a lot harder in the last decade. So let me give you a kind of a 30,000 foot picture of what I think's happened. If you go back to the last millennium, sort of the 80s and 90s, you were then in a period where all of the media was curated. So what that meant was that if you wanted to get your message across, you had to get it past an editor or a director or a producer. And the other thing was that the economics of the media meant that everybody wanted to get a big audience. I mean, the only difference possibly was magazines, where you could have specialist magazines, but generally newspapers, radio, television, all wanted to get a broad audience because that's how they generated advertising dollars. So when the Herald was launched in 1840 or thereabouts, they had on the front page the lines of Pope, "In moderation placing all my glory, while Tories call me Whig and Whigs a Tory." And that was, you know, just that basically, I'm sure they were not as broad-minded as that in reality, but what they wanted to do was get everyone to read it. Okay, so what's happened? Well, firstly, the technology has meant that media can narrowcast.
Yeah.
So you can have, you can, because the cost of producing television and broadcasting via the internet is so low, you know, to have a newspaper, you don't need to have any paper. You know, to have a television channel, you don't need to have a television station. And, you know, everybody with an iPhone has got, in effect, a little television studio in their pocket. And what this has meant is that you've got mainstream media outlets, which are basically narrowcasting. And so you get something like Fox News in the United States, which if you look at it, it'll tell you that, you know, Donald Trump is the salvation of the world and, you know, he's doing a great job and so forth. Then you switch over to MSNBC or CNN and he's the devil incarnate. And there's plenty of other, you know, examples that are even more partisan than that. So that creates a problem. Then you add onto that social media and you know, which is Twitter, Facebook, so forth, you know, Instagram, Snapchat, etc. And people are able to express their own views directly, unfiltered. And here's the problem that you get, that people no longer have facts in common. In other words, people can live in a little silo where they believe only what's being told to them by the sources of information that happen to broadly share their prejudices or positions.
Carrie Ann Conway's alternative facts.
Correct, exactly right. And so that is so dangerous, because if everybody's got the same, you know, broadly speaking, the same facts, then you can have a discussion at a local or a national level. But, you know, if you are in this sort of these parallel universes, it does make the society very divided. And what social media has done, I mean, there's quite a good discussion, he said modestly, but there's a discussion about this in my book, which has got some good contributions from discussions I had with people like Paul Kelly, who, you know, who've been living in the belly of the beast there at News Corp for a long time. And, you know, it has become unhinged. I mean, in a sense, a lot of the mainstream media, News Corp being the best example, is basically as biased and as mad as what you see on Twitter. And so where do you find the balance? Where do you find an attempt to be objective? It's very, very dangerous. And I don't think we actually have yet worked out how to handle these phenomena. I think they're because you can see that they're really undermining democracy. Far from liberating democracy, they're actually undermining it, because a fundamental precondition, I think, of a healthy democratic society is that people do have reliable sources of information which represent, if you like, the shared facts, you know, the facts in common. And you see, it's one thing, Phil, for someone to say, okay, you know, I'm entitled to my own opinion. Yeah, of course you are. And we always used to say, but you're not entitled to your own facts. But now people literally will say, oh, yes, I am, you know. and that's when you then get into the barking mad area.
So your book's called A Bigger Picture.
Yes.
And it conveys the view of a vision that you might have for Australia and for society. How do you take that forward? I mean, I'm not interested really in digging too deeply into the political part of the time you spent there, but any reflections you want to offer, please go ahead. But the bigger picture, the vision, where does Australia go in a society which is fractured, not as badly as the US, I might add, but we're certainly fractured. You can see just over the COVID, there's that's being exploited from time to time for political benefit. And
well, look, Phil, okay, let me put this to you. I am a huge optimist about Australia. I think that we are the most successful multicultural society in the world. I think that is based on a foundation of mutual respect. So we have to be really vigilant about people to oppose people, whether they're in politics or the media or anywhere else, who want to divide us and turn us on each other. You know, I mean, Trump is doing this in the States in a very calculated way for his own political gain. And I fear that a lot of people in politics in Australia are looking at him and saying, wow,
there's a model.
There's a model there, yeah. This is really dangerous because it might win Mr. Trump another election, but the damage that is being done to him, I mean, it makes, as someone who loves America and American values, it makes me weep watching what's happening there. And I mean, I can't imagine how gut-wrenching it is for the Americans. So we've got to be very careful about that. I think a critical thing we have to do is to remember that we must always be competitive. You know, I know, you know, you get people say, oh, you know, whenever Malcolm talked about innovation, people didn't like it and so forth. But, well, you know, the bottom line is, unless you are pushing ahead in innovation, science, technology, investment, unless you are constantly trying to stay at the front of the pack, you will fall off the back. And, you know, that is, and so, you know, there's a lot, people can be so complacent. I mean, look at our universities, for example. Look at our universities who, in their greed and complacency, allowed the level of foreign students to get up to the extraordinary levels they did, right? With a massive concentration to Chinese students, right? And they never apparently thought that there was any risk associated with that, you know? And I remember, I won't say who it was, but, you know, about 18 months ago, one of the chancellors said to me, oh, you know, I do wonder whether we've got a bit of a concentration risk here. And I said, of course you do. I said, you're like someone in a business who's only got one customer. Yeah. You've got to try and spread your 101. Spread your risk. And I said, and you've got to ask yourself, do we really want to have, you know, in some universities, a third or more of the students being foreign students, and then you recognizing that there is a risk that they may not keep coming, you know, because you see the difficulty, and of course then, you know, you get this problem that the universities have taken all that lovely money in, they've hired a lot of people, they've built a lot of grandiose buildings, all of which require to be maintained, without thinking about how sustainable, you know, that flow of foreign students is. Now, hopefully it'll all get back to normal and everyone will do well, but there just didn't seem to be a lot of sort of, you know, risk assessment there. There was just this complacency, and that's a real risk. I mean, I sleep well at night, I've got to tell you, very rarely toss and turn. So using this metaphorically, you know, people of authority should be anxious. They should, if they're going to be tossing and turning at night, they should just be thinking about those long-term risks and constantly working out ways of hedging themselves, because, you know, the tenor of our times is volatility and unpredictability. And so you've got to make sure that you get that to work to your advantage, and don't put yourself in a position where if there's a change in circumstance, you're flat on your back.
So to change gears just a little, Your time in politics was turbulent.
Well, everyone's time in politics was turbulent.
Absolutely. But you've had some successes there.
Mm.
What were the things, or what are the things that you, when you fall asleep at night, you feel warm and proud of that you've done as a result of that? I mean, my children call the light globes the Malcolm globes because we've gone from energy sucking iridescent or incandescent lights to low voltage. I mean, that's one thing that doesn't get a lot of play, but
well, look, I think in terms of the, okay, I mean, there's a bit in my book where I discuss that, and let me put it this way: there are many things that you do in politics which are critically important, but which, frankly, anybody else would have done at the time. You know? I mean, for example, I mean, Hawke and Keating get enormous credit for floating the dollar. Every country in the world was floating their currencies at the time. That would have happened. It wouldn't have mattered.
The passenger seat theory. You're a passenger.
Well, it's not. No, but it's not a theory. I mean, it's a fact. There are, if there will be roads built, hospitals built, schools built, and they all have to be done well and executed well and so forth. But there are some things that you can do in politics and government which are sort of idiosyncratic or would not have happened without you, you being me in this case. And I think they would include Snowy Hydro 2.0, biggest pumped hydro storage system in the Southern Hemisphere, under construction. The Commonwealth Government building Western Sydney Airport. Literally no one in the Liberal Party wanted to do that. They wanted to give it to Sackle. Legalising gay marriage. I mean, that would have happened if Labor had got back in, but I don't think any other Liberal leader would have got that done. Saving the Trans-Pacific Partnership. That was a very solitary mission on my part, and to get Shinzo Abe on board. And as Shinzo's acknowledged, I mean, I'm not sort of being vainglorious here, but I stuck with it and got him over the line, and then we got others over the line, and that big trade deal, which everyone thought was dead, was revived. I mean, there are a bunch of other things, but I think those are, there's some of the big changes that, I just don't, it's not that I think, I know would not have happened had I not been PM. So from my point of view, I got a lot more done as Prime Minister than I thought was possible, and certainly a lot more than anyone, the press gallery in particular, thought was possible. So while I was PM for a couple more years less than shorter period than I would have liked, I'm very pleased with the achievements that I got done.
Well, you're not constrained by political factions. You're a man independent.
Yeah, well, the Liberal Party, Philip, look, let me cut to the chase here.
Yeah.
There are factions in every political party. In the federal Liberal Party room, they don't operate as formally and as strictly as they do, say, in Labor, where they are literally like parties within a party, or even, as far as I can tell, as they do within the state parliamentary Liberal Party room. So there is a bit of, it's a little bit looser, but it's still very present. Now, the problem that the Liberal Party has got is that the right wing, and this is, the people that was, great supporters of Abbott, for example, who were supported by the shock jocks like Jones and, the right wing media of Murdoch and so forth. That right wing group has got to the point where it essentially holds the party to ransom. And they are increasingly, and you've seen the efforts that was exposed in the Fairfax media the other day about, Sukar and characters in Victoria, recruiting people out of the churches, including the Mormon church, in order to stack the Liberal Party in Victoria out so that it can become more right-wing. Now, Victoria, this is the weird, so here's the weird thing. This is how mad it's got. The two most small L Liberal jurisdictions in Australia are the ACT and Victoria. And that's, you know, I think any observer of politics would agree with that. The two divisions of the Liberal Party in ACT and Victoria are controlled by the hard right. Now that's mad, because that guarantees that you're setting yourself at odds with the electorate. And the problem is that they've got a sense of entitlement, which leads them to basically say, if we can't get what we want, we'll blow the joint up. And that's that rule of terror is a profound problem in the Liberal Party, because you see that the thing about a party, political party, it depends on a premise, and the premise is we all get together in the room, we talk about an issue, we kick it around, and then we go along with the majority, you know, or the consensus. You mightn't even put it to a vote. But what the right does increasingly is says, if we don't get what we want, even if we are in the minority, we will blow the joint up. And that sadly is the paradigm now. So the Liberal Party is no longer a broad church in the sense that it was when, you know, it was founded by Menzies. So it's a real problem. I mean, you know, which everyone's keeping a lid on it at the moment because of COVID, but I think it's a fundamental weakness, because the right do not accept the responsibilities of being in a party. They're only interested in being a party that does what they want. And what that will do over time is it will drive more people, smaller Liberals out of the Liberal Party and, you know, undermine its relevance. So I just conclude with, because, you know, I'm a lawyer, a bit of evidence. Think about the 3 roll gold safe Conservative seats that are now held by independent small L Liberal women. You know, Mayo, Beck Sharkey, Indi, Helen Haynes, and of course here in Sydney, Warringah Zali Steggall, and only by, you know, a whisker, Wentworth is not currently held by the previous
Karen Phelps,
previous member Karen Phelps, who won it at the by-election. So could have been 4. Now what that tells you is that the voters, Liberal voters, are not happy with that sort of right-wing view of the world. See, if you went to a Liberal Party state council, they would cheer Tony Abbott to the echo, right? They love him. And I reckon there'd be plenty of people there that would boo me. There'd be a few that would cheer, but there'd be plenty of, the right wing would just do everything short of throwing chairs. And yet Tony got wiped out in Warringah, a safe Liberal seat, where he'd represented for 20 odd years, because his electorate hated him. So what does that tell you about how out of touch these characters are? So it's a fundamental political problem, you know.
One of those problems which the electorate will resolve one way or the other.
Yeah, well, they will.
It may
but
take a long time.
Yeah.
Malcolm, we're getting up close to 7:30 today. It's wonderful to see someone of the vision that you have still holding the flame, I suppose, and no doubt somebody who's done as much as you've done over the years will continue to be doing something for the public and for the good of the country. So thank you for that, and thank you so much for spending your time with us this evening. I must say I commend the book to anybody who chooses to read it. I found it fascinating to be rolling through that and actually recognise people and events and transactions and things that I've had a small part in as well. But it's a great read. It's well written, and I think it actually holds well for the opportunities and identifies the future vision that Australia needs. So the big picture, yep, absolutely. Good, thank you. Thank you very much. We must get out and do that sailing. Okay, see you later. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye. Cheers, Malcolm. Bye-bye.
Francis, Frosty.
How are you?
Is it just the three of us now?
No, the people can still see at the moment. There's no facility to be able to turn us off without ending the Zoom. So,
Okay. So let's end the Zoom.
okay.
Okay.
Good night.
Good night.
Bye.